Hi everyone, here is part 2 of your solving radical equations notes. So here are the steps that I wrote out. First, if you'll remember, we isolate the radical, so try to get the radical by itself on one side. Then we're going to square both sides, so in that step, so we can get rid of our radical, so we can get everything, all the contents out of it. Third step is to solve our equation like normal. And then our fourth step is to check. Now, checking in the last examples wasn't as big of a deal. In this video, I'm going to show you why checking your answers is very important because some of them might not always work. So let's just go ahead and get started. All right, so remember our first step is to isolate the radical. So there's nothing else here outside the radical. Like if there was a +2 or a -5 out here, I would need to move that over here. But in this case, we just isolated the radical. There's nothing else here. So step 1 is done. Step 2, I need to square both sides. So I need to square this side for sure to get all this stuff outside the radical. And if I do that, I have to square the other side. All right, so when I square this radical, the contents just come out like this. So I get 2x minus 1 equals. All right, now I have x minus 2 squared. So do you guys remember this formula? We have a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. That's the formula for squaring a binomial. So if you can't remember this formula, you could also always just FOIL, because x minus 2 squared is the same as x minus 2 times x minus 2, right? All right, so either way you choose to do it, I'm going to use this method. But if you want to use this method, that's perfectly fine too. You just have to remember to FOIL it, and you're not just squaring these terms. You'll definitely get different answers. All right, so I'm going to use my equation for squaring a binomial. So a squared, my a here is x, so a squared is going to be x squared. Then I have plus 2ab, so plus 2 times a, so 2x, 2 times x, times b, which is -2. All right, and then plus b squared. So b is -2, so -2 squared. -2 times -2 is +4. All right, so that's going to actually give me x squared minus, because 2 times -2 is -4, times x is -4x plus 4. And again, if you don't really like this method, you could always FOIL here. So you'd have x times x is x squared, and then minus 2x, enter minus 2x plus 4. So you get the same thing here. I'll write that right here. So you'd have x squared minus 2x for your outer terms, minus 2x for your inner terms, and then plus 4. So ultimately you'd get the same answer. So either way you want to work that, that's fine. All right. Now remember, I want to get x all on one side, right? I want to get all my x's on one side. So I'm going to move these two terms over here. So I'm going to add 1 to my number here. I'm going to subtract 2x from this 4x here because they're the same terms. So I'm going to have 0 equals x squared. -4x minus 2x is going to be -6x. And 4 plus 1 is going to give me 5. All right, so how do I solve this problem now? All right, I need to factor this out so I can have one x term and another x term, because I don't know how to solve for this x squared when I have an extra x here hanging out. So I'm going to factor this and then solve. All right, so I have, let's see, how do I factor a trinomial? I'm going to use my X method. So looking for factors of 5 that add to give me -6. So I have, the only two factors of 5 are 1 and 5, right? 1 plus 5, does that give me -6? No, it doesn't. So I'm going to need -1 and -5. If I multiply those two, do they give me +5? Yes, they do. If I add them, do they give me -6? Yes, they do. So I can just go ahead and write out these answers, because remember, if my first term is 1 here, I can just go ahead and write them out in parentheses. So x minus 5, and then I have x minus 1 here, and those are both equal to 0. All right, so I'm not done yet. Remember, I want to solve for x, so I'll have x equals something. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break each of these apart. I'm going to say x minus 5 equals 0, right? Because that's what it says here. And then I'm also going to say x minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to check and see what happens with both of them. So here, if I add 5, I have x equals 5. If I add 1, I have x equals 1. All right, so it looks like a lot, but it's really using all the stuff that we've done so far. So I isolated the radical, I squared it to get the contents out here, then I got all my x terms together on one side so I can solve for x. When I do that, I had a trinomial, right? So when I had my trinomial here, I knew I can factor that by using X method. Then I'm going to set them both equal to 0 and solve them. So basically I look at it as x minus 5 equals 0, and I look at it as x minus 1 equals 0. All right, so let's check both of these answers to see if they work. So if I had, let's see, square root, let's check x equals 5 first. So if I add square root 2 times 5, 2 times 5 minus 1 equals 5 minus 2. All right, so first I'm checking this answer here. Is this answer going to work? All right, so 2 times 5 is 10, minus 1 is 9, so square root of 9 equals 5 minus 2. All right, so what is the square root of 9? It's 3, and 5 minus 2 is also 3. So this answer will work. I'm going to go ahead and box that one. That one will work. Now let's plug in 1 for x and see if it's going to work. All right, so I have 2 times 1 minus 1 here equals 1 minus 2. All right, so I just plugged in 1 instead of 5 here, so 1 for x. So I have 2 times 1 is 2, minus 1 is 1. So this is square root of 1 equals 1 minus 2 is going to be negative 1. All right, so square root of 1 is 1. And does 1 equal negative 1? It does not. So this answer will not work. And in this case, we're only looking at the positive square root when we take the square root here, just for our checking purposes. But in this case, x equals 5. And if you think about it, it makes sense because in our original problem, we only had x to the first power. It's just a first degree polynomial, right? So we only have 1 as our exponent, so we're going to have 1 answer. It makes sense, right? All right, let's try another one real quick. All right, so first step. Remember our steps up here? First step is to isolate the radical. So I need to get the radical by itself on one side of the equals sign. So I need to get rid of this 1 here. I'm going to move it. I'm going to subtract 1, so I'll have x minus 1 equals square root of x plus 5. All right, now remember, how do I get these contents out of the radical? I'm going to square it. So I got to square both sides because whatever I do to one side, I've got to do the other. So this will just become x plus 5. Now I have x minus 1 squared. So I could say x minus 1 times x minus 1, and I could FOIL. Or I could use my squaring a binomial formula. So I'm going to use that. So a squared is x squared minus 2 times a times b, or plus 2 times a times b. So plus 2 times x, so plus 2x times b. So 2x times negative 1 here is going to give me minus 2x. Then I have plus b squared. So b squared would be negative 1 squared, which is just plus 1. Like I said, if you don't like that formula, if you're not comfortable, if you don't have it memorized, you can always use your foiling method here, and it'll work the same way. All right, so now, remember, I need to get all my x's on one side, so I'm going to go ahead and move these things over. I'll subtract my 5 here, just to make things a little easier. So now I have x squared minus 2x minus x is minus 3x. And then I have plus 1 minus 5 is minus 4 equals 0. Now, remember I have a trinomial. How do I factor these trinomials? I can use x method. So factors of negative 4 that add to give me negative 3. So factors of 4 are 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. Which one of those will add to give me a number that's 3? I know it's going to have to be 1 and 4. Now, will one of them would be positive, or will they both be positive? Will one be negative? We need them to add to equal negative 3. So how can I do that? If I make this 4 negative, I have 1 plus negative 4 is going to give me negative 3. So I can write this as x minus 4 times x plus 1 equals 0. Now I can set them both equal to 0 and solve. Alright, so this is just simply moving these terms over, so x equals 4. Alright, now let's check both of them. So if I had, look back at my top equation here, let's check 4 first. So 4 equals 1 plus square root of 4 plus 5. So I just plugged in this answer that I got right here. I just plugged it in for x in my original equation. So 4 equals 1 plus square root of 9. 4 equals 1 plus 3. So 4 equals 4. That one will work. So I'm going to use that answer. All right, now let's plug in negative 1 here. So I have negative 1 equals 1 plus square root of negative 1 plus 5. All right, so negative 1 equals 1 plus square root of 4. So negative 1 equals 1 plus 2. Negative 1 equals 3, which is not true. So I will not be using x equals negative 1. So that's why it's very important to check your answers. I hope this video helps. This was just a little extra practice with these. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to ask, comment, message me, and I hope you have a great week.